I never thought I'd hear those words from someone who claimed to love my grandson. "You smell like old books, Mrs. Lancaster," she said with a little wrinkle of her nose, not realizing she was insulting the very essence of who I am. But that moment, that single careless comment, revealed everything I needed to know about Amelia's true character. She didn't just dislike my scent. She resented what it represented: my library, my legacy, my lifetime of carefully curated knowledge. The same library that her eyes appraised like a real estate opportunity every time she visited. The same collection she casually asked about in terms of market value and insurance estimates. By the time I discovered she'd been researching rare book dealers behind my grandson's back, I knew exactly what needed to be done. My library's deed would indeed change hands, just not in the way Amelia expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come wrapped in the oldest, dustiest covers. I've spent 63 years surrounded by books. Ever since I was a little girl, hiding with a flashlight under my covers, I've found more comfort in the written word than almost anywhere else. My late husband Richard understood this about me from our very first date, when he took me to a small, independent bookstore instead of a restaurant or movie theater. "I want to see what your eyes light up for," he'd said. That was the moment I knew he saw me, truly saw me. Together, Richard and I built a life around our shared passions. He was a professor of literature at Westfield College for 35 years. I worked as the head librarian at the city's main branch for nearly 3 decades. We weren't wealthy in the conventional sense. 2 educators rarely are, but we were. Rich in the ways that mattered most. Our modest Tudor-style home on Maple Street became our sanctuary, and over the years, we transformed it into something extraordinary. The east wing of our house, originally intended as a sunroom and small guest suite, gradually evolved into what the locals now call the Lancaster Library. Richard and I spent decades collecting everything from leather-bound first editions to obscure academic texts, from illustrated classics to signed modern works. Custom shelves line every wall from floor to ceiling, with rolling ladders to reach the highest treasures. A magnificent oak reading table centers the main room, flanked by 2 worn leather chairs where Richard and I spent countless evenings, reading aloud to each other by the light of the stained glass lamp his mother had gifted us on our wedding day. When Richard passed away 7 years ago, the library became more than just a collection. It became my lifeline. While other widows might have downsized or moved closer to family, I couldn't bear to leave. This house, these books, they hold Richard's fingerprints, his margin notes, his dog-eared corners. Sometimes in the quiet evenings, I can still hear him clearing his throat before reading a particularly moving passage. Between Richard's pension, my own retirement fund, and a small inheritance from my sister, I live comfortably enough. The mortgage was paid off years ago, and I bring in about $4,200 each month, not lavish by any measure, but sufficient for my modest needs. My property taxes are higher than I'd like, given the size of the house, but the library is worth every penny. According to the last appraisal, done for insurance purposes after that minor water damage scare, the collection itself is worth just over $2.7 million. Some of the rarer volumes account for much of that value, of course. Richard had a particular talent for spotting undervalued first editions before they became sought after. The signed Hemingway alone is worth more than our first house was. But I've never thought of books in terms of monetary value. To me, they're living things, repositories of wisdom and wonder that deserve reverence, not price tags. I open each one carefully, respectfully, as if greeting an old friend. Over the decades, I suppose I've absorbed their scent, that distinctive blend of paper and leather and time that my daughter Sarah calls Grandma's perfume. Sarah visits every Sunday without fail, usually bringing a casserole that will feed me for half the week, Her husband Mark comes along when his golf schedule permits. They live just across town in a sensible 4-bedroom colonial, where they raised my only grandson, Nathan. Ah, Nathan. The true joy of my later years. From the moment he could toddle, that boy was drawn to my library like a moth to flame. I'd find him sitting cross-legged in the corner, a massive atlas spread across his little lap, tracing coastlines with his finger. By age 8, he'd commandeered the window seat, where he'd spend hours lost in adventure stories. I never had to push. Reading on him, it was in his blood. When he decided to major in comparative literature at the State University, Richard was still alive to witness it. I'll never forget my husband's face that day. The pride, the sense of continuation. The Lancaster legacy. "Lives on," he'd said, squeezing my hand. Now 32, Nathan works as an editor at Meridian Publishing downtown. It's not the academic career his grandfather might have envisioned, but it keeps him surrounded by words, by stories. That's what matters. Every Wednesday evening, he still comes for dinner and borrowing privileges, often leaving with a tote bag full of books that might inform whatever manuscript he's currently editing. Those Wednesday evenings became the steady rhythm of my weeks after Richard passed. I'd spend the day preparing, dusting the shelves of whichever section Nathan was currently exploring, baking his favorite rosemary bread, selecting a few volumes I thought might interest him. We'd eat in the library at the oak table, breaking all the rules about food near books that I'd strictly enforced during his childhood. Then we'd talk about literature, about his work, about life. The only cloud in my otherwise peaceful existence was Nathan's unfortunate history with relationships. Like many sensitive, intellectual young men, he seemed drawn to women who viewed his gentle nature as something to exploit rather than treasure. There was Olivia, who borrowed his credit card for a weekend shopping spree with her friends. Then came Rebecca, who systematically isolated him from his college friends, followed by Jennifer, who seemed more interested in the connections his publishing job could provide than in Nathan himself. Each heartbreak left him a little more guarded, a little more hesitant. I worried he might eventually stop trying altogether. That's why, when he called me on a Tuesday morning last February, excitement vibrating in his voice, I felt both hope and trepidation. "Grandma," he said, "I've met someone. Her name is Amelia. She's incredible, smart, driven, beautiful. She works in art acquisition for the Westfield Museum. I've never met anyone who understands my passion for literature the way she does. She's coming to dinner tomorrow. I wanted you to be the first to meet her." How could I not be thrilled, after years of watching him choose women who dimmed his light? The possibility that he'd found someone who might actually nurture it was worth celebrating. I spent the next day in a flurry of preparation, polishing the oak table to a high gleam, selecting my finest tea service, baking not just the usual rosemary bread, but also a lemon cake with fresh berries. I even pulled a bottle of Richard's prized port from the cellar, untouched since his passing. A special occasion demanded a special toast. As evening approached, I changed into my favorite navy dress with the pearl buttons, the one Sarah insists brings out the blue in my eyes, and added a spritz of the lavender water Richard had given me on our last anniversary. When the doorbell rang at precisely 6:30, I felt a flutter of anticipation in my chest. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could see two silhouettes, Nathan's familiar tall frame, and beside him, a slender figure with what appeared to be an elegant updo. I smoothed my silver bob, took a steadying breath, and opened the door. Nathan's face was alight with an almost boyish happiness I hadn't seen in years. "Grandma," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "This is Amelia Crawford." She was striking, I'll give her that. Tall and poised, with auburn hair twisted into an elaborate knot, wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly income. Her makeup was flawless, her jewelry minimal but obviously expensive, small diamond studs and a delicate gold watch that caught the light when she extended her hand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Mrs. Lancaster," she said, her voice melodic and practiced. "It's such a pleasure to finally meet you. Nathan talks about you constantly." Her handshake was firm, professional. Up close, I noticed her eyes, amber-colored and sharp, taking in everything with a quick, assessing glance. Those eyes moved past me almost immediately, scanning the entryway with its wall of family photographs, lingering on the antique console table that had been Richard's grandmother's. "What a charming home," she said, but there was something in her tone. A slight emphasis on charming that felt like code for quaint or outdated. "Nathan mentioned you have quite the library. I'm very excited to see it." I led them through to the dining room, where I'd set the table with my best china. I'd decided against eating in the library that evening. Some instinct told me to save the full reveal of my collection until after dinner. Nathan pulled out chairs for both of us, always. The gentleman, just like his grandfather, and we settled in for the meal. Amelia was the picture of graciousness. She complimented the bread, asked for the recipe for the roasted vegetables, and insisted on helping clear plates between courses despite my protests. She asked thoughtful questions about my time as a librarian, seeming genuinely interested in my stories about the rare book room and the conservation techniques we'd pioneered. "That's actually adjacent to my field," she explained, delicately dabbing her lips with a napkin. "At the museum, I specialize in paper artifacts, manuscripts, maps, illuminated texts. The preservation challenges are quite similar." I felt myself warming to her. Perhaps Nathan had finally found someone who shared his intellectual interests, who might appreciate the legacy that meant so much to our family. Over dessert, she asked, about Nathan as a child, and I gladly shared stories of him falling asleep surrounded by picture books, of the elaborate stories he'd dictate to me before he could write them himself. "He was reading at 3, I told her proudly. "Richard, my husband, used to joke that Nathan learned his letters before his numbers." "Speaking of your husband," Amelia said, setting down her fork, "Nathan mentioned he was a collector. Is that where your interest in rare books began? We're both collectors," I corrected gently. It was a shared passion. Richard had a particular eye for American first editions, while I focused more on illustrated classics and women authors who'd been undervalued by the market. "How fascinating," she said, leaning forward slightly. "And all these books are here, in the house?" "Nathan mentioned something about a private library wing?" Nathan jumped in, his eyes bright. "Grandma's collection is incredible, Amelia. Wait until you see it. There's a signed Steinbeck that would make you weep." I smiled at his enthusiasm. "We can have our port in the library," I suggested, rising to clear the dessert plates. "Let me help," Amelia insisted, gathering dishes with efficient movements. In the kitchen, as we loaded the dishwasher, she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to taking charge. "Nathan tells me you live here alone," she said, her voice casual. "This is quite a large house for one person to maintain." "I manage just fine," I replied, perhaps a bit more stiffly than intended. "Sarah and Mark help with the heavier tasks, and I have a service that handles the gardens." "Of course," she said smoothly. "I didn't mean to imply. It's just that these older homes can be so demanding. My aunt had a similar situation. A beautiful historic property, but so many maintenance issues as she got older. In the end, she decided to donate it to the Historical Society. They named a wing after her." Before I could respond to this thinly veiled suggestion, Nathan appeared in the doorway with the bottle of port and 3 glasses on a tray. "Ready for the grand tour?" he asked, oblivious to the subtle tension in the air. The moment we entered the library, I felt myself relax. This was my domain, my sanctuary. The evening light filtered through the stained glass panels of the west-facing windows, casting jewel-toned patterns across the oak floorboards. I'd left the banker's lamps on low, creating pools of warm golden light among the shelves. The room smelled of leather and paper and the beeswax polish I use on the woodwork, a scent that always feels like coming home. Nathan set the tray on the reading table and immediately began pointing out highlights of the collection to Amelia. "This entire section is first editions," he explained, gesturing to the north wall. "And over here are the signed copies. Grandma, where's the wolf letter? The one tucked into To the Lighthouse?" I moved to the appropriate shelf, carefully, extracting the volume in question. Inside was a handwritten letter from Virginia Woolf to a reader, discussing the lighthouse as metaphor. One of Richard's most treasured finds. Amelia accepted the book with appropriate reverence, handling it with the practiced care of someone trained in artifact management. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, her eyes widening as she scanned the letter. "Do you have provenance documentation?" "Of course," I replied. Richard was meticulous about authentication. "All the relevant papers are in the filing cabinet." In the corner, she returned the book but continued to scan the shelves, her gaze now taking on a different quality. Less appreciative, more calculating. She moved from section to section with increasing animation, occasionally pulling out a volume, checking its edition information, then carefully replacing it. "Mrs. Lancaster," she said finally, turning to face me. "This is not just a personal library. This is a serious collection. Have you ever had it formally appraised? The insurance value must be significant." Nathan poured the port while I considered my response. "It was appraised after Richard passed," I said carefully. "For insurance purposes, as you mentioned." "And?" she prompted, accepting a glass from Nathan. "The monetary value is substantial," I conceded. "But that's never been the point. These books are our family's legacy." "Of course," she said quickly. "But proper valuation is essential for preservation planning. The Westfield Museum would be happy to send over our conservation specialist to assess any volumes you're concerned about. Pro bono, naturally." Nathan beamed at her. "Isn't that generous, Grandma? Amelia's connections could be a real resource for maintaining the collection." I smiled tightly, raising my glass in a toast. "To new friendships," I said, deliberately changing the subject. As we sipped Richard's port, Amelia moved to the leather armchair, Richard's chair, and settled into it with comfortable authority. "This room is remarkable," she said, her amber eyes sweeping the space once more. "A true cultural treasure. It seems almost a shame to keep it private when so many scholars and enthusiasts could benefit from access." Nathan looked at her adoringly. "That's what I've always thought. Grandma and Grandpa created something special here. It deserves a wider audience." I felt a flicker of unease. While I'd occasionally hosted small groups of graduate students or fellow bibliophiles, the idea of my sanctuary becoming a public space had never appealed to me. The library was personal, intimate, filled with Richard's notes, my annotations, our private code of symbols, and stars marking passages that had special meaning to us. "I prefer to keep it as Richard and I intended," I said. "A family collection primarily, though Nathan will decide its ultimate fate when the time comes." "Speaking of family," Amelia said, setting down her glass and leaning forward, "Nathan mentioned you've been somewhat isolated since your husband passed. I hope you'll consider me part of your support system now. I know how difficult it can be for people of your generation to adapt to changing circumstances." "My generation?" I echoed, one eyebrow rising involuntarily. Nathan intervened quickly. "Amelia just means she wants to be here for you, Grandma. We both do." Amelia nodded, her expression one of practiced concern. "Exactly. And part of caring is having difficult conversations about the future. These beautiful books, this house, managing it all must be increasingly challenging." I straightened in my seat, suddenly very aware of the direction this conversation was taking. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm quite capable of managing my affairs," she smiled, a perfect display of white teeth that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Absolutely. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. It's just that in my professional experience, valuable collections like this require succession planning. The right institutional partnership could ensure these treasures are properly preserved while alleviating the burden on you." As she spoke, she rose and moved toward one of the glass-fronted cases that contained some of our most valuable volumes. Her fingers, with their perfectly manicured nails, hovered near the latch. "Is this where you keep the Hemingway? Nathan mentioned a signed Old Man in the Sea?" Before I could answer, she leaned closer to examine the case. And that's when it happened. She took a small step back, her nose wrinkling almost imperceptibly, and said, "You smell like old books, Mrs. Lancaster. It's charming, really, like being in a vintage bookshop." The room seemed to still. Nathan froze, port glass halfway to his lips, his expression horrified. I remained seated, my back straight, my face carefully neutral despite the heat rising to my cheeks. "Amelia," Nathan finally managed, his voice strained. "What?" she asked, genuinely puzzled by his reaction. "It's a compliment. I love that smell. It's authentic." But in that unguarded moment, I'd seen the truth beneath her polished veneer. It wasn't just an offhand comment, it was a dismissal. To her, I was as antiquated as the volumes on my shelves, something with historical value but past its prime, ready to be cataloged and shelved appropriately. More revealing was how quickly she recovered, smoothing over the awkward moment with practiced charm. "I've always associated that scent with wisdom," she continued, her tone warming. "With lives well lived and stories worth preserving. It's one of the things that drew me to work with historical collections." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and careful politeness. Nathan, clearly embarrassed, tried too hard to bridge the sudden gap. Amelia became even more solicitous, asking about my health, my daily routine, whether I found the stairs difficult to navigate at my age. When they finally left around 9:30, Nathan hung back for a moment after helping me with the dishes. "Grandma, I'm so sorry about what Amelia said. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. She's just direct sometimes." I patted his hand. "Don't worry about it, dear. No offense taken." But as I closed the door behind them and returned to the quiet of my library, I knew something fundamental had shifted. In that single careless comment, and more importantly, in the calculating look that had preceded it, I'd glimpsed Amelia's true nature. She didn't see a vibrant woman with a lifetime of knowledge and passion. She saw an old lady who smelled of decay, sitting atop a valuable collection that would be better managed by younger, more qualified hands. I settled into Richard's chair, running my fingers along the worn leather armrests where his hands had rested for decades. "Well," I said aloud to the empty room. That was illuminating. The books around me stood silent, watchful, my oldest and most faithful companions. I reached for the nearest shelf and pulled down a volume at random. It was our copy of Pride and Prejudice, the pages well thumbed, the margins filled with Richard's neat script and my more flowing hand, decades of conversation captured in ink. I smiled as I opened to a random page and found one of Richard's favorite passages underlined. I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. "Exactly, Mr. Darcy," I murmured. "Exactly." That night, I lay awake long past my usual bedtime, replaying the evening in my mind. It wasn't just Amelia's comment about my scent that troubled me. It was the proprietary way she'd moved through my library, the carefully planted suggestions about institutional partnerships, the subtle implications that I was no longer capable of maintaining my collection properly. Most concerning was Nathan's obvious enchantment with her. I recognized the signs all too well. The eager way he sought her approval. How quickly he jumped to translate her rudeness into something more palatable. My grandson, for all his intelligence and sensitivity, had once again found someone who saw him not for himself, but for what he could provide, in this case access to a valuable book collection. As dawn began to filter through my curtains, I came to a decision. I would not confront Amelia directly. I would not risk alienating Nathan with accusations he wasn't ready to hear. Instead, I would watch and wait and document. If my suspicions proved correct, I would need irrefutable evidence before acting. And, if I was wrong, if by some chance Amelia truly loved Nathan for himself and her interest in my library was purely academic, then I would gladly welcome her into our family. But something in my bones, something in the way those amber eyes had catalogued my possessions with the precision of an appraiser, told me to prepare for battle. I rose early that morning and made my way to the library. The rising sun cast long shadows through the stained glass windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny sentinels. I moved to the heavy oak desk in the corner, Richard's desk, and pulled out a fresh, leather-bound journal. On the first page I wrote, a single sentence. The true value of any collection lies not in its monetary worth, but in the love with which it was assembled. Then I began to plan. Amelia's presence in our lives increased with the precision of a well-plotted novel. After that first evening, she began appearing at family functions with calculated regularity. Sunday dinners with Sarah and Mark, my birthday, celebration at the local bistro, even the annual Lancaster family picnic at Ridgeview Park. Each appearance was carefully choreographed, her behavior flawless, her gifts thoughtful and expensive. For Sarah's dinner the following weekend, she arrived, with an artisanal cheese basket from that exclusive shop downtown that always has a line out the door. I remembered you mentioning your love of sharp cheddars, Mrs. Lancaster, she said, presenting it with a flourish. For Mark, she'd included a small batch bourbon that he'd once mentioned in passing. How thoughtful, Sarah murmured, shooting me a questioning glance over Amelia's shoulder. My daughter has always been perceptive. Too perceptive, Nathan would argue, and I could tell she was reserving judgment. During dinner, Amelia regaled us with stories of her work at the museum, name-dropping trustees and donors with practiced casualness. The Harrington Foundation just committed $5 million to our new manuscript preservation wing, she mentioned between bites of roast chicken. Speaking of which, Mrs. Lancaster, I've been thinking about your Virginia Woolf letter. Have you considered having it properly framed with UV protective glass? I'd be happy to arrange it through our conservation department. Before I could answer, she smoothly pivoted to ask Mark about his golf handicap, leaving her offer hanging in the air like a perfectly baited hook. I caught Sarah's eye again and gave an almost imperceptible shake of my head. Later, as we cleared dishes in the kitchen, my daughter kept her voice low. She's certainly attentive, Sarah observed, loading plates into the dishwasher. Quite, I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. Nathan seems happy. He does? Sarah paused, dishcloth in hand. But, I sighed, I'm not sure yet. Just keep watching. My daughter nodded, understanding perfectly. We Lancaster women have always communicated, as much in silences as in words. Over the next 2 months, Amelia's campaign of charm intensified. She began stopping by my house unannounced, always with some thoughtful pretext. I was just passing and remembered you mentioned needing fresh lemons for your tea. Or, I found this lovely bookmark and thought of you. Each visit inevitably led to the library, where she would admire different sections of the collection, asking increasingly detailed questions about provenance, condition, and acquisition dates. She was particularly interested in my insurance arrangements and whether I'd considered more secure storage options for the most valuable items. The humidity levels in residential properties can be so unpredictable, she explained during one such visit, running her fingers along the spine of a leather-bound Dickens. At the museum, we maintain constant environmental controls. It really extends the life of delicate materials. Richard installed a specialized climate system when we converted this wing, I replied, gesturing toward the discreet vents placed strategically throughout the room. It's independently controlled from the rest of the house. The humidity is monitored hourly. How forward-thinking, she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Still, as these volumes age, their needs become more specialized. Have you updated the system recently? It was always like this, subtle implications that I wasn't doing enough, couldn't do enough to properly care for my collection. Each suggestion delivered with such practiced concern that objecting would make me seem stubborn or defensive. Amelia was especially attentive whenever Nathan wasn't present. She'd offer to help me organize shelves, to catalog new acquisitions, to check references, always positioning herself as indispensable, as the natural caretaker of both me and my library. "You're spending so much time here," I observed one afternoon as she insisted on making me tea. "Doesn't the museum miss you?" "I've adjusted my schedule," she said breezily. "Relationship building is important in my field. The museum understands." The way she said relationship building sent a chill through me. It sounded less like genuine affection and more like a professional strategy. During these visits, I maintained my role as the grateful, slightly dotty older woman, expressing appropriate appreciation for her help while revealing nothing of my growing suspicions. Meanwhile, I continued my private documentation, noting each question about the collection's value, each suggestion about institutional partnerships, each barely concealed assessment of my mental acuity. Twice today, she reminded me of conversations we've never had, I wrote in my journal after one particularly transparent attempt to make me doubt my memory. When corrected, she immediately apologized, claiming a mix-up with another conversation. This is the third such incident this month. Nathan, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to these undercurrents. He flourished under Amelia's attention, arriving for our Wednesday dinners with a new confidence, a new wardrobe, even a new haircut that emphasized his jawline. Amelia thought a more classic style would help with those executive meetings, he explained when I commented on the change. I bit my tongue, keeping my concerns to myself. After all, I had no concrete proof of anything beyond an excessive interest in my library and some questionable social skills. If Amelia made Nathan happy, who was I to interfere? Then came the dinner party incident. Amelia had suggested hosting a small gathering at my house to showcase the library to a few select colleagues who would truly appreciate its significance. Against my better judgment, I agreed, partly out of curiosity about how she would present my collection to her associates. The guest list included the museum's head curator, 2 trustees from prominent local families, and an art dealer from New York who specialized in rare manuscripts. Nathan was bursting with pride, clearly viewing the evening as Amelia's vote of confidence in our family's cultural contribution. I spent the day preparing, making sure the library was immaculate, selecting which volumes to feature on the display stands Richard had built for special viewings. By 6 o'clock, I was dressed in my best black velvet dress with Richard's mother's pearls, ready to play hostess to people who undoubtedly viewed themselves as cultural gatekeepers. Amelia arrived an hour early, wearing a striking emerald silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. "Let me help with the final touches," she insisted, immediately beginning to rearrange the refreshment table I'd already set up. "I thought we'd welcome everyone in the front parlor," I said, then moved to the library after introductions. "Oh, I've already told everyone to come directly to the library entrance," she replied without looking up from her reorganizing. "It creates a more dramatic first impression. The Harringtons are major donors, Mrs. Lancaster. If they're suitably impressed with your collection, it could open significant opportunities." "Opportunities for what, exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She straightened, finally meeting my gaze. "For preservation partnerships, of course. collaborative exhibitions, perhaps even a named collection within the museum's rare book, room. She adjusted her emerald earrings, a nervous tell I'd begun to recognize. Nothing would need to change immediately, of course, but establishing these relationships now ensures your legacy is properly secured. My legacy. As if I were already gone. My collection up for negotiation before I'd even left this earth. The guests arrived precisely on time, filing into my library, with the confident entitlement of people accustomed to being welcomed everywhere. Amelia made the introductions with practiced smoothness, referring to me as our dear Mrs. Lancaster, with a proprietary warmth that set my teeth on edge. Eleanor has been kind enough to allow us this private viewing, she told them, using my first name, though she had never once addressed me as anything but Mrs. Lancaster to my face. Her late husband began collecting American first editions in the 1960s, and Eleanor continued the tradition after his passing. I smiled politely, but made a mental correction. Richard and I had built this collection together from the beginning, a fact Amelia knew perfectly well. This subtle erasure of my role, relegating me to mere custodian of my husband's hobby, was deliberate, I was certain. As the evening progressed, I observed Amelia in her element, guiding her guests through the collection with the authoritative air of a curator rather than a visitor. She knew where each significant volume was shelved, recited their acquisition histories, sometimes accurately, sometimes not, and framed each showcase piece within the context of the museum's current holdings. "Imagine this Steinbeck displayed alongside the Dorsey collection," she said to the female trustee, a steel-haired woman with a perpetual expression of mild disappointment. "It would create a comprehensive representation of American literary development between the wars." "The continuity would be compelling," the woman agreed, examining the book through narrowed eyes. "Have you discussed potential arrangement terms?" Before Amelia could answer, I stepped forward. "I don't believe we've reached the arrangement discussion stage," I said pleasantly but firmly. "Tonight is simply about sharing these treasures with appreciative eyes." Amelia recovered quickly, laying a hand on my arm. Of course. Eleanor is absolutely right. We're getting ahead of ourselves." She gave my arm a little squeeze, as if soothing a child. "Perhaps we should move on to the poetry section. The signed frost is particularly moving." As she led the group toward the east wall, I caught a whispered exchange between her and the art dealer. "How advanced is she?" he murmured with a slight nod in my direction. "Sharp as ever," Amelia replied quietly. "But realistic about the future. I'm helping with the transition planning." Transition planning. As if my collection, my life's work alongside Richard, was already being parceled out for its next destination. I maintained my composure throughout the evening, playing the gracious hostess while mentally recording every presumptuous comment, every exchange of meaningful glances, every subtle repositioning of my role from owner to temporary caretaker. By the time the last guest departed, my face ached from maintaining a pleasant expression. Nathan, who had arrived halfway through the evening directly from work, was ecstatic. "Did you hear what Mrs. Harrington said about Grandpa's Hemingway?" "Collection?" he asked as we cleared crystal glasses from side tables. "She called it museum quality. And that dealer from New York? He said our Faulkner first editions are better preserved than the ones at the Morgan Library." "Our collection does have some notable pieces," I agreed carefully. "Amelia says this could be the beginning of a significant partnership," he continued excitedly. "Imagine, Grandma, the Lancaster collection could have its own dedicated space at the Westfield Museum. Your name, Grandpa's name, would be permanently honored." I studied my grandson's face, his genuine enthusiasm, his pride in what he clearly viewed as recognition long overdue for his grandparents' passion. He didn't see what I had seen, the calculating assessment of value, the casual assumptions about transition, the subtle positioning of Amelia as the collection's future guardian. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in the library with a small glass of Richard's favorite scotch. The room felt different somehow, as if strange eyes had left invisible fingerprints on my most treasured possessions. I moved to Richard's desk and opened my journal, recording the evening's observations in careful detail. As I wrote, a memory surfaced. Richard in this very chair, examining a first edition we'd discovered at a small estate sale in Vermont. "The value isn't in what you could sell it for," he'd said, running his fingers reverently over the binding. "It's in knowing its journey, in being part of its story." I glanced up at the shelves surrounding me, at the thousands of volumes whose journeys had intersected with ours. Each one contained not just its printed story, but our story, where we'd found it, what we'd sacrificed to acquire it, the conversations it had sparked between us. That was the true collection, the true legacy that Amelia and her museum friends could never quantify or display. But my suspicions about Amelia required more than observations of social presumption. I needed concrete evidence of her intentions, evidence that would make Nathan see what I was seeing. Setting aside my journal, I began to formulate a plan. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my longtime friend Judith, who had served as a board member at the Westfield Museum before her retirement. The second was to my attorney Maxwell Goldman, who had handled Richard's estate and knew our collection intimately. The third was to a private investigator whose services I had never imagined needing. "I require information," I told the investigator, "about a museum professional named Amelia Crawford." That afternoon, I added a new entry to my journal. "The game, as Sherlock Holmes would say, is afoot. Information arrives in curious ways when you're looking for it." Within a week of contacting the private investigator, I received my first report on Amelia Crawford, and it was illuminating, to say the least. Born Amelia Diane Richardson to middle-class parents in Springfield, she had reinvented herself completely upon moving to Westfield. The Crawford surname was her maternal grandmother's, adopted when she entered graduate school. Her much-referenced international education consisted of a single summer program in London, not the extensive European study she had implied. Most telling was her employment history: 3 positions at increasingly prestigious cultural institutions, each lasting approximately 18 months, each ending after she had established relationships with wealthy patrons or board members. In each case, the investigator noted, Ms. Crawford left to pursue opportunities facilitated by connections made through her workplace. Some of these departures coincided with significant bequests or donations from elderly patrons with whom she had cultivated close relationships. I read the report twice, sitting at Richard's desk with a cup of tea gone cold beside me. It confirmed my suspicions while raising new questions. Was Nathan simply her latest target? Or was there genuine affection beneath the calculation? I placed the report in my wall safe behind a false panel of bookshelves, a security feature Richard had insisted upon when the collection's value began to exceed our homeowner's insurance limits. Then I continued my own subtle investigation. Judith, my former librarian colleague who had served on the museum board, provided additional context during our lunch at the Wisteria Cafe the following day. Amelia Crawford, she mused, stirring her soup thoughtfully. Yes, quite the social climber. Arrived at the museum about 2 years ago and immediately attached herself to the Harrington family. Rumor has it she was briefly engaged to their younger son before something fell through. The Harringtons were at my house last week, I mentioned casually. Amelia hosted a viewing of our library. Judith's spoon paused midway to her mouth. Did she? How interesting. Just between us, Eleanor, there's been talk about her methods of, shall we say, securing acquisitions for the museum. Nothing actionable, mind you, just concerns about her becoming unusually close to certain elderly patrons who subsequently donated valuable items. Has the museum expressed any interest in book collections recently? I asked. They've been actively expanding their literary artifacts department. The new wing is desperate for notable collections to justify its funding. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. What exactly is her relationship with your grandson? They've been dating for about 3 months. Nathan is quite taken with her. Judith's expression softened with concern. Be careful, Eleanor. I've seen her type before. They have a knack for identifying assets and finding the quickest path to them. As I suspected, Amelia's interest in my preservation planning was likely coordinated with the museum's acquisition goals. The pattern was becoming clearer, but I still needed more evidence, something Nathan couldn't dismiss as mere misunderstanding or professional enthusiasm. My opportunity came sooner than expected. The following Wednesday, Nathan called to cancel our regular dinner. Emergency meeting at work, he explained apologetically. A manuscript is behind schedule, and we're all hands on deck tonight. Rain check until Sunday? I assured him it was no problem, secretly pleased to have an evening to myself after the intensity of recent weeks. Around 6 o'clock, I was settling into my reading chair with a new mystery novel when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Amelia, impeccably dressed in a camel blazer and cream silk blouse. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door with a convincingly surprised expression. Amelia, this is unexpected. Nathan isn't here. He had to work late. I know, she said smoothly, holding up a cloth bag from an upscale kitchenware store. He texted me. I thought you might appreciate some company and dinner since your plans. Changed? I brought that wild mushroom soup from Bellini's that you mentioned liking. It was a thoughtful gesture, if one believed it was motivated by concern rather than opportunity. I invited her in, noting how she glanced immediately toward the library wing. I was just about to make tea, I said. Would you like some? Let me, she insisted, taking charge as usual. You sit and relax. Is the kettle still on the back burner? The fact that she knew exactly where I kept my kettle was telling. She had been cataloging more than just my books during her visits. While she busied herself in the kitchen, I made a quick decision. Moving to the hallway, I activated the small recording device Maxwell, my attorney, had recommended installing after our consultation about Amelia's interest in the collection. The tiny camera and microphone were disguised within a decorative wall sconce, positioned with a clear view of the library entrance. I had initially balked at such surveillance, but Maxwell had been insistent. Documentary evidence, he'd said, firmly, can be crucial in situations where influence or coercion might be alleged later. Now I was grateful for his foresight. If Amelia was here for reasons beyond friendly concern, I wanted a record of it. We ate the soup in the kitchen, making polite conversation about neighborhood happenings and an upcoming exhibition at the museum. Amelia was charming as always, asking about my bridge club and whether my arthritis was bothering me in the cooler weather, a condition I had never mentioned having. Tea in the library? She suggested as we finished, already gathering the cups. I've been reading about that Hemingway letter we discussed, and I had some thoughts on its authentication that might interest you. I followed her through the house, watching as she navigated directly to Richard's desk without hesitation, setting down the tea tray and immediately pulling out the second drawer where I kept reference materials. I believe the authentication documents were in here, she said, rifling through the folders with the confidence of someone who had done so before. The Sotheby's certificate and the letter from that handwriting expert in Chicago? I hadn't shown her those documents, nor had I mentioned where they were stored. The realization sent a chill through me, even as I maintained my pleasant demeanor. Actually, those are in the safe, I said, watching her reaction carefully, along with the insurance writer for the most valuable items. Her eyes flickered with interest. A safe? How prudent. Is it here in the library? I don't believe you've mentioned it before. Behind the false panel in the Americana section, I replied, deliberately vague about which of the 3 false panels in the library actually concealed the safe. Richard was quite security conscious. As one should be with treasures like these, she agreed, abandoning the drawer and moving to scan the Americana shelves with new interest. Would you mind showing me? I've been meaning to discuss proper storage options for your authentication documents. The museum uses archival quality folders with acid-free sleeves. Before I could respond, her phone chimed. She checked it, her expression changing subtly. "Nathan's still stuck at work," she announced. "Poor thing, he's so dedicated." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and turned to me with renewed focus. "Since we have this unexpected time together, perhaps we could discuss something I've been meaning to bring up." She settled into Richard's chair, a presumption that still rankled, and pulled a slim folder from her designer tote bag. "The museum is launching a new planned giving initiative," she began, her tone shifting from casual to professional. "For significant collections like yours, we've developed a specialized program that provides substantial benefits for the donor." I sat across from her, maintaining a mildly interested expression. "Benefits?" "Tax advantages primarily, but also continued access for family members, prominent donor recognition, and most importantly, the peace of mind knowing your collection will be preserved according to the highest professional standards." She slid a glossy brochure across the desk. "The Lancaster collection would have its own dedicated space within the new wing?" I examined the brochure without opening it. "This sounds like a donation discussion, Amelia. I haven't expressed any interest in donating my library." Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Not an immediate donation, of course. This would be planned giving, arrangements that take effect after your lifetime. Nathan mentioned you haven't updated your estate planning since Richard passed. This could be an elegant solution for the collection's future." The casual mention of my lifetime and Nathan's private discussions with her about my estate planning felt like twin slaps. I set down the brochure. "Nathan and I have already discussed the collection's future," I said calmly. "It will remain in the family." She leaned forward, her voice taking on a note of practiced concern. "Eleanor? May I call you Eleanor? Family. Inheritances of significant collections often create tremendous burdens. The insurance alone can be crippling, not to mention the specialized maintenance. Most heirs end up selling piecemeal out of necessity, destroying the collection's integrity and scholarly value." Her use of my first name without permission did not go unnoticed. "My financial arrangements are quite adequate," I replied. "The collection will be fully endowed." A flicker of calculation crossed her face as she reassessed her approach. Of course. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just that Nathan has expressed concerns about managing such a responsibility with his career demands. He's quite torn between honoring your wishes and being practical about his capabilities." This was almost certainly a lie. Nathan had never expressed any such concern to me, and his reverence for the collection had been unwavering since childhood. I decided to press further. "When did Nathan discuss these concerns with you?" She hesitated, then recovered smoothly. "We've had several conversations about long-term planning. As your relationship becomes more serious, these considerations naturally arise. He's deeply committed to honoring your legacy, but also realistic about the practicalities." While she spoke, I noticed her gaze continually drifting to the Americana shelves, mentally calculating the location of the safe I had mentioned. Her interest in my legacy was becoming more transparent by the minute. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but my estate planning is well in hand. Maxwell Goldman has managed my affairs for decades." "Goldman?" Her eyebrows rose slightly. "I believe he's approaching retirement himself. The museum works with Harrison and Wentworth for estate matters. They specialize in cultural assets. I'd be happy to arrange an introduction." The suggestion that I replace my trusted attorney with her connections was the final confirmation I needed. I stood, signaling an end to the conversation. "It's getting late, and I have my book club reading to finish. Thank you for the soup and your information." For a moment, frustration flashed across her features before she composed herself and stood. "Of course. I've given you a lot to think about. Perhaps you could discuss the brochure with Nathan when you see him Sunday?" I've already briefed him on some of the key benefits. I escorted her to the door, maintaining pleasant small talk while inwardly seething at her presumption. As soon as she left, I returned to the library and deactivated the recording device, then removed its memory card and placed it in the actual safe, behind the false panel in the British literature section, not the Americana shelves I had misleadingly mentioned. That night, I reviewed the recording on my laptop. It captured everything: Amelia's unauthorized searching through Richard's desk, her calculated questions about the safe's location, her fabricated claims about Nathan's concerns. Most tellingly, during the few minutes I had stepped away to use the bathroom, it showed her quickly photographing several pages of acquisition records I had intentionally left visible before returning to her seat with practiced nonchalance. The evidence was mounting, but I still needed to understand the full scope of her plans. If her interest was purely in acquiring my collection for the museum, that would be manipulative but not necessarily nefarious. But something about her methods, the fabricated conversations with Nathan, the rapid escalation of estate planning, discussions, the careful isolation of me from my usual advisors, suggested a more personal agenda. For that, I needed to follow the money. Maxwell Goldman, when consulted the next morning, confirmed my suspicions after making a few discreet inquiries. "The museum's acquisition budget is extremely limited right now," he reported via phone. "Their new wing is significantly over budget. Even with donor naming opportunities, they couldn't afford to purchase a collection of your scale. They'd be relying entirely on donation." "And Amelia's position?" I asked. "She's on a contract that expires in 3 months, with renewal contingent upon meeting certain acquisition targets. Additionally," he added with the careful tone he reserved for delicate matters, "there appears to be a significant performance bonus for major acquisitions. A collection valued at several million would certainly qualify." So there it was. Amelia's professional future, and likely a substantial financial reward, depended on securing my collection. Her relationship with Nathan was almost certainly a calculated path to that goal. I thanked Maxwell and hung up, feeling a curious mixture of vindication and sadness. My suspicions had been correct, but that brought no joy, only the grim realization that my grandson had once again been chosen not for himself, but for what he could provide access to. As I sat contemplating my next move, my phone chimed with a text from Nathan. "Dinner Sunday still good? Amelia has exciting news she wants to share with you." I stared at the message, a sense of foreboding washing over me. Exciting news could only mean one thing: their relationship was advancing to the next level. Time was running short. I needed to act before announcements were made, before Nathan committed himself irrevocably to someone who saw him as merely a stepping stone to a professional triumph and financial windfall. But how to open his eyes without seeming like a meddling grandmother bitter about his happiness? The answer, when it came to me, was both simple and fitting. If Amelia's interest was fundamentally about acquiring rare and valuable things, then perhaps the best test of her character would involve another rare and valuable thing, something even more immediate than my library. I picked up my phone and called Sarah. "Darling," I said when she answered, "do you still have your grandmother's diamond ring in your safety deposit box? The one with the salon sapphire?" "I believe it's time it came back into circulation." My mother's ring arrived Friday afternoon, delivered personally by Sarah, who lingered in the kitchen, her concern evident as she watched me place the heirloom jewelry box on the counter between us. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her fingers tracing the worn velvet of the box. "It's been in the family for 4 generations. I opened the lid, revealing the spectacular ring nestled inside, a 3-carat diamond surrounded by salon sapphires in an intricate platinum setting. In today's market, its value easily exceeded $75,000, but its sentimental worth was incalculable. My father had purchased it in 1943 before shipping out to the Pacific, carrying it through the war until he could place it on my mother's finger upon his return. "I'm not giving it away," I assured Sarah. Just using it to illuminate a truth Nathan needs to see for himself. My daughter nodded reluctantly. Your trap is well baited. But what if she passes the test? What if she genuinely loves him despite her interest in the library? It was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly during sleepless nights. What if I was wrong? What if, beneath the calculation and professional opportunism, Amelia truly cared for Nathan? Could I separate my protective instincts from objective assessment? Then I'll welcome her properly, I said firmly. And apologize for my suspicions. Nathan's happiness matters more than being right. Sarah squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, I think your instincts are correct. There's something off about her interest in both Nathan and the library. Too convenient, too perfectly timed with the museum's new wing. After she left, I carefully positioned the ring. Box on my bedroom dresser, where it would be visible but not obvious. A calculated risk for Sunday's dinner. Then I turned my attention to preparing the final elements of my plan. First, I called Maxwell Goldman, explaining what I intended to do and asking him to prepare certain documents, not for immediate use, but as contingency. Next, I phoned Nathan to confirm Sunday's dinner, adding that I had a family matter to discuss that required Sarah and Mark's presence as well. Finally, I contacted the private investigator, requesting an update on Amelia's recent activities. The report arrived Saturday morning via encrypted email. Amelia had indeed been busy. She had met twice with the museum director in private meetings, scheduled an appointment with a jewelry appraiser specializing in estate pieces, and, most tellingly, had lunch with a real estate agent who specialized in historic properties in my neighborhood. She was laying groundwork, making preparations for what she clearly believed would be a significant acquisition, both of Nathan and, through him, my collection. The timing aligned perfectly with her contract renewal and the museum wing's completion date. Armed with this information, I spent Saturday preparing for Sunday's dinner. I chose the menu deliberately. Richard's favorite beef Wellington, asparagus, with hollandaise and Duchess potatoes, dishes that required attention and time, showcasing the traditional cooking skills Amelia had once dismissed as charmingly old-fashioned. By Sunday afternoon, the house was immaculate, the table set with my best china and crystal, fresh flowers arranged in the center. I'd even pulled a bottle of Richard's finest Bordeaux from the cellar, a 1982 that he'd been saving for a momentous occasion. This dinner would certainly qualify, though not in the way Nathan might expect. Sarah and Mark arrived first, tension evident in their stiff smiles and quiet conversation as they helped me with final preparations. Nathan and Amelia arrived precisely at 6, Amelia carrying an elaborate floral arrangement that immediately overwhelmed my simple centerpiece. "These are gorgeous," I said, accepting them with appropriate gratitude while noting they were identical to arrangements I'd seen in the museum's donor reception area. "I'll find another vase for them." Nathan seemed unusually nervous, fidgeting with his cuffs and exchanging meaningful glances with Amelia. They had dressed formally, he in a charcoal suit I didn't recognize, she in a sleek navy dress that whispered of expense. Clearly, they anticipated this being a significant evening. Dinner began smoothly, with conversation flowing easily through the appetizer course. I noticed Amelia was particularly attentive, refilling my wine glass without being asked, complimenting the food with enthusiasm, asking thoughtful questions about family photographs visible from the dining room. If I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed how her gaze occasionally drifted toward my bedroom doorway, visible down the hallway. As we finished the main course, Nathan cleared his throat, setting down his fork with deliberate care. "Before dessert," he began, his voice slightly higher than normal, "Amelia and I have something we'd like to share with everyone." My heart sank, even though this moment was exactly what I had anticipated. Beside him, Amelia beamed, reaching for his hand with practiced affection. "We're engaged," Nathan announced, his face flushed with happiness. "I asked Amelia to marry me last night, and she said yes." Sarah gasped convincingly while Mark offered immediate congratulations. I maintained a neutral smile, watching as Amelia extended her left hand to display a modest diamond solitaire. "It's beautiful," I said, examining the ring. "Congratulations to you both." "Thank you, Mrs. Lancaster," Amelia replied, her voice warm with emotion that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your blessing means everything to us." Nathan squeezed her hand, clearly relieved by my measured response. "We're thinking of a spring wedding," he continued. "Small, intimate. Family is what matters most." "Speaking of family," I said, rising from my chair, "this calls for a proper toast. I have something special I'd like to share. Would everyone excuse me for a moment?" I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. Taking a deep breath, I opened my jewelry box and removed my mother's simple strand of pearls, leaving the ring box conspicuously visible on the dresser. Then I deliberately knocked over a small bottle of perfume, creating enough noise to be heard in the dining room. "Eleanor?" Amelia called from the hallway. "Do you need help?" "I'm fine," I called back. "Just knocked something over. I'll be right out." I waited 30 seconds, then opened the door to find Amelia standing there, concern painted on her features. "I thought you might need assistance," she said smoothly. "Nathan mentioned your arthritis has been troubling you." That night I reviewed the recording on my laptop. It captured everything: Amelia's unauthorized searching through Richard's desk, her calculated questions about the safe's location, her fabricated claims about Nathan's concerns. Most tellingly, during the few minutes I had stepped away to use the bathroom, it showed her quickly photographing several pages of acquisition records I had intentionally left visible before returning to her seat with practiced nonchalance. The evidence was mounting, but I still needed to understand the full scope of her plans. If her interest was purely in acquiring my collection for the museum, that would be manipulative but not necessarily nefarious. But something about her methods, the fabricated conversations with Nathan, the rapid escalation of estate planning discussions, the careful isolation of me from my usual advisors, suggested a more personal agenda. For that, I needed to follow the money. Maxwell Goldman, when consulted the next morning, confirmed my suspicions after making a few discreet inquiries. The cow. "Museum's acquisition budget is extremely limited right now," he reported via phone. "Their new wing is significantly over budget. Even with donor naming opportunities, they couldn't afford to purchase a collection of your scale. They'd be relying entirely on donation." "And Amelia's position?" I asked. "Another fabrication. I had no arthritis, and Nathan knew it." "How thoughtful," I replied. "I was just getting these." I displayed the pearls. "My mother wore them on her wedding day. I thought they might be appropriate for tonight's celebration." Her gaze shifted past me to the dresser where the ring box sat, its lid now partially open, the diamond catching light from the bedside lamp. I pretended not to notice her interest, brushing past her toward the dining room. "Shall we rejoin the others?" I believe Mark was about to propose a toast. Dinner concluded with appropriate celebration, though I noticed Amelia seemed distracted, her responses slightly delayed as if her mind were elsewhere. As Sarah and I cleared dessert plates, Nathan pulled me aside in the kitchen. "You're okay with this, right?" he asked quietly. "With Amelia, I mean." "I know it seems fast, but when you know, you know." I cupped his cheek gently. "I want your happiness above all else," I told him truthfully. "Why don't you help Mark open another bottle of wine?" I think Amelia mentioned wanting to see the library again. Something about a first edition she was curious about. He nodded eagerly. "She's been researching conservation techniques for some of Grandpa's more fragile volumes. She really cares about preserving the collection properly." As he headed toward the cellar steps, I returned to the dining room to find it empty. Amelia had indeed gone to the library, but not before making a detour. My bedroom door stood slightly ajar. Inside, dresser drawers had been hastily searched, their contents disturbed. The jewelry box remained open, but the ring was gone. Instead of confronting her immediately, I activated the library's hidden recording system, then made my way deliberately, slowly toward the library, allowing her time. When I entered, Amelia was examining a shelf of first editions, her hands clasped innocently behind her back. "Nathan mentioned you had questions about a particular volume," I said pleasantly. She turned, composing her features into a smile. "Yes, the Fitzgerald. I've been reading about acid-free archival containers that might help preserve the dust jacket. The museum just acquired a complete set of specialized cases." "How fascinating," I replied, moving to Richard's desk and opening the drawer where I kept my reading glasses. "I've been meaning to upgrade our preservation materials. Perhaps you could recommend a supplier." We chatted about book conservation for several minutes, her demeanor perfectly normal, except for the slight tension around her mouth and the way her left hand remained buried in her dress pocket. Eventually, Nathan appeared in the doorway. "There you are! Mark's opened that bottle of Chateauneuf-du-Pape you were saving, Grandma. Shall we have some in the living room?" As we prepared to leave the library, I deliberately dropped my glasses case. When I bent to retrieve it, I glanced. Under the reading table where the small wastebasket was partially visible. Inside, crumpled hastily, was a jewelry store receipt. Amelia had apparently removed it from the ring box and discarded it. The date showed my mother's ring had been appraised just 3 weeks earlier, with its current market value clearly noted. "Coming?" Amelia called from the doorway, her voice betraying the slightest edge of impatience. "Right behind you," I answered, straightening slowly, the receipt now concealed in my palm. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of toasts and wedding discussions. Amelia spoke enthusiastically about venue options and flower arrangements, seemingly untroubled by the theft she had just committed. I participated appropriately while observing her left hand, still buried in her pocket or concealed beneath the table. When they finally left around 10 o'clock, Nathan hugged me tightly. "Thank you for being so supportive," he whispered. "I know you had reservations about Amelia at first." I held him a moment longer than usual. "I only want what's best for you," I said softly. "Always remember that." Sarah and Mark departed shortly, after Sarah squeezing my hand with silent understanding. Once alone, I retrieved the memory card from the recording system and watched the footage on my laptop. It captured everything: Amelia entering my bedroom, rifling through my dresser drawers, examining the ring with expert assessment, pocketing it without hesitation, then checking the jewelry box for documentation. Her expression as she read the appraisal receipt was unmistakable. Calculation, triumph, satisfaction. I sat in Richard's chair for a long time afterward, the empty ring box open before me. The evidence was irrefutable now, not just professional opportunism, but outright theft. Yet confronting Amelia directly would likely lead to denial and counter-accusations. Given her calculating nature, she might claim the ring was a gift, or that I had forgotten giving it to her in my increasingly confused state. No, this situation required a different approach, one that would open Nathan's eyes without putting him in the impossible position of choosing between his grandmother's word and his fiancé's. The next morning, I called Nathan at work. "I seem to have misplaced Mom's ring," I said, careful to keep my voice even. "The sapphire one in the velvet box. I was showing it to Amelia last night. I thought it might be something she'd like to wear for the wedding. But I can't remember where. I put it afterward. My mind isn't what it used to be. I don't suppose she mentioned it?" His concerned pause told me everything. "I don't think so, Grandma, but I'll ask her tonight." "Oh, don't worry her about it," I said quickly. "I'm sure it will turn up. Memory. Lapses at my age are to be expected. Perhaps I should have Maxwell stop by to help me look. He knows where all the important family pieces are documented." I ended the call and immediately contacted Maxwell, filling him in on the latest developments. "She took the bait," I told him. "Now we wait." I didn't have to wait long. By 2 o'clock, Amelia was on my doorstep, her expression a perfect blend of concern and helpfulness. "Nathan mentioned you were looking for a ring," she said as I invited her in. "I thought I might help you search. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes is useful." "How thoughtful," I replied. "I've looked everywhere. It's the strangest thing. The box is on my dresser, but the ring is gone. I distinctly remember showing it to someone last night, but I can't recall who." Her expression remained sympathetic, though I detected a flicker of calculation. "Could you have put it somewhere safe? Perhaps in your library? I know you mentioned a hidden safe at one point." "The safe? Of course," I exclaimed with exaggerated relief. My mind these days. "Would you mind terribly coming with me to check? The combination sometimes gives me trouble." She followed eagerly, as I led her to the library, directly to the false panel in the Americana section she had shown such interest in previously. "It should be right behind here," I said, pressing the concealed latch to reveal not a safe, but a small cubby containing a single leather-bound journal. "That's strange," I murmured, removing the journal. "I was certain the safe was here." "Amelia's eye?" Confusion was evident as I opened the journal and began to read aloud. April 15th. Amelia arrived unexpectedly when Nathan canceled dinner. Searched desk drawers when she thought I wasn't looking. Photographed acquisition records. Asked pointed questions about safe location. Her face drained of color as I continued reading entries documenting her every manipulation, every fabrication, every unauthorized search of my home. When I reached the previous day's entry detailing the theft of my mother's ring, she took an involuntary step backward. "What is this?" she demanded, her composure cracking. "Some kind of senile fantasy? You've been spying on me?" "Not spying," I corrected calmly. "Observing, documenting, protecting my grandson from someone who sees him as nothing more than access to valuable assets." "That's absurd," she snapped. "I love Nathan. Yes, I've taken professional interest in your collection. That's my job. But to suggest I'm with him because of a bunch of old books is insulting." "Old books worth millions," I noted. "Books that coincidentally align perfectly with your museum's acquisition needs and your contract renewal goals. Books that would secure your professional future and a substantial performance bonus." Her eyes widened slightly. I wasn't supposed to know about the bonus. Before she could respond, I reached into my pocket and withdrew my phone, displaying the video of her taking the ring. "But we've moved beyond professional opportunism now, haven't we? This is theft, Amelia. Grand larceny, according to Maxwell. The ring is worth over $75,000. "I didn't," she began, then stopped, recalculating. "You misunderstand. You offered to show me the ring. I assumed it was a wedding gift. I was going to surprise Nathan. With a ring you put in your pocket without a word? A ring you're not wearing now? A ring whose appraisal receipt you threw away?" I shook my head sadly. The museum board would be very interested in this recording, as would the police. For the first time, genuine fear flashed across her face. "What do you want?" "Only what I've always wanted. My grandson's happiness and well-being." I closed the journal. "Return the ring, end the engagement citing career conflicts, and never contact Nathan again. In exchange, this recording and my documentation remain private." "You're blackmailing me," she said incredulously. "I'm offering you a dignified exit," I corrected. "One that preserves your professional reputation and keeps you out of legal jeopardy. The alternative would be unpleasant for everyone, particularly Nathan." She stared at me for a long moment, reassessing everything she had assumed about the elderly woman she had so grievously underestimated. Finally, she reached into her purse and withdrew my mother's ring, placing it on the desk between us. "You've been planning this all along," she said quietly. "No," I replied honestly. I've been hoping to be wrong. Hoping that beneath your professional interest in my collection, you genuinely cared for my grandson. The ring was a test you could have passed simply by admiring it and leaving it where it was. She had no response to that. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the library, out of my house, and, I fervently hoped, out of Nathan's life. I sat alone in the silence that followed, my mother's ring cool against my palm, victory tasting unexpectedly bitter. I had protected Nathan, protected my collection, but at what cost to his heart? How would he recover from yet another relationship founded on false pretenses? The answer, I realized, would require something more than the truth. It would require compassion, both from me and, somehow, from Nathan himself. Nathan's call came at 10:37 the following morning. His voice was hollow, stripped of the animation that had characterized it just days before. Amelia ended things, he said simply. Said, her career needs to take priority right now, that she's not ready for the commitment. I gripped the phone tightly, torn between relief that she had honored our agreement and heartache for my grandson's pain. I'm so sorry, dear, I said, the words feeling terribly inadequate. Would you like to come over? Silence stretched between us, and for a moment, I feared he might decline. Yeah, he finally answered. I'd like that. He arrived an hour later, shoulders hunched against a light spring rain, his face drawn with the particular exhaustion that comes from emotional blindsiding. I didn't ask questions, didn't probe. Instead, I led him to the kitchen and made hot chocolate the way I had when he was a child. With real melted chocolate, a pinch of cinnamon, and homemade marshmallows I kept in the freezer specifically for moments of crisis. We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising between us, until Nathan finally spoke. She returned the ring I gave her, he said, staring into his mug. Said she couldn't accept it given the circumstances. Then she blocked my number. He looked up, confusion evident in his reddened eyes. It was so sudden. Last night she was discussing wedding venues, and today she's completely gone. Did she say anything to you? Give any indication? I considered my answer carefully. The truth would bring clarity but also additional pain. A comforting lie might spare him momentarily, but would deny him the understanding needed to truly heal. In the end, I chose a middle path. Amelia and I had a conversation yesterday, I acknowledged. She came by to help search for my mother's ring, the one I apparently misplaced after showing it to her Sunday evening. His brow furrowed. Your mother's ring? You found it, right? Yes, it turned up. I sipped my chocolate, giving him space to process the implication. Recognition slowly dawned in his eyes. Was it ever actually lost? Let's just say it was temporarily relocated. Nathan set down his mug, connecting pieces of a puzzle whose full picture he was only beginning to glimpse. Grandma, what exactly happened between you and Amelia? I rose and held out my hand. Come with me to the library. There's something you need to see. In the library, I showed him selected portions of the video evidence, not the theft itself, which would have been too painful, but Amelia's careful examination of acquisition records, her searching through Richard's desk, her pointed questions about the safe. I showed him the private investigator's report detailing her pattern at previous institutions. Finally, I showed him the museum's internal memo about acquisition targets for the new wing, with my collection highlighted as priority. Alpha, throughout this unveiling, Nathan remained silent, his expression shifting from skepticism to disbelief to a dawning, devastating comprehension. When I finished, he walked to Richard's reading chair and sank into it, passing a hand over his face. I'm such a fool, he whispered. Again. No, I said firmly, kneeling beside the chair despite my protesting joints. You're someone who sees the best in people, who trusts, who loves openly. Those are strengths, Nathan, not weaknesses. The world needs more people who lead with their hearts, not fewer. But my heart keeps choosing wrong, he countered bitterly. First Olivia, then Rebecca, Jennifer, and now Amelia. What's broken in me that I keep attracting people who just want to use me? The question hung in the air between us, raw and painful. I reached for his hand, holding it between both of mine. Nothing is broken in you, I said gently. But perhaps there's something you haven't yet learned to see. The people who truly love us don't come with agendas or calculations. They don't measure our worth by what we can provide. True connection isn't about acquisition, it's about recognition. We sat together in silence for a long while, the afternoon light shifting through the stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned patterns across generations of books lovingly collected. Eventually, Nathan's breathing steadied, his shoulders relaxing, incrementally. I found it, you know, he said suddenly. Found what? Your journal from that trip you and Grandpa took to Maine the summer before I was born. It fell behind the shelf last month when I was reorganizing the travel memoirs. I was going to return it, but I ended up reading it first. He looked around. The library, his gaze lingering on certain shelves, certain volumes. It changed how I see this place. I remembered that journal, my musings about the antiquarian bookshops we'd visited along the coast, the excitement of finding an undervalued first edition in a dusty shop in Portland, Richard's boundless enthusiasm when we discovered a signed Robert Frost in a church rummage sale. You wrote that collecting books wasn't about owning things, Nathan continued. It was about preserving connections between people across time. That every book is a conversation that never has to end. He met my eyes directly. I think I've been focusing on the wrong things when it comes to relationships. Looking at the cover instead of reading what's inside. His insight, so close to what I had tried to teach him throughout his life, brought tears to my eyes. Perhaps this painful experience had given him something valuable after all. Perspective. In the weeks that followed, Nathan immersed himself in work, in family, and increasingly in the library. He began spending Sunday afternoons helping me catalog newer acquisitions, photographing rare items for insurance purposes, and digitizing Richard's handwritten acquisition notes. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, the shared work healing something in both of us. One rainy Tuesday, about 2 months, after Amelia's departure, Nathan arrived at my door unexpectedly, looking nervous but determined. I've been thinking, he began as we settled in the library with tea, about the future of the collection. My heart stuttered, fearing he might suggest selling it after all, a permanent severing of painful associations. Oh? I want to learn everything about it, he said, surprising me. Not just which books are valuable or rare, but why you and Grandpa chose each one, the stories behind the acquisitions, the conversations in the margins. He gestured at the surrounding shelves. This isn't just a collection of books. It's a map of 2 lives intertwined. I want to understand it properly, to care for it the way you have. Relief and joy washed through me. I'd like that very much. And, he added hesitantly, I've been thinking about making the collection more accessible, not donating it or selling it, he clarified quickly, but maybe opening the library for limited scholarly access, supervised research sessions, specialized tours for graduate students, that sort of thing. The suggestion startled me, but as I considered it, I recognized its merit. Richard had always believed knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. Making our collection accessible to serious researchers would honor that belief while maintaining our family's connection to it. Your grandfather would approve, I said softly. Nathan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. There's something else. I met someone. At the university archives, actually. She's a conservator specializing in paper conservation. Her name is May. A conservator? I raised an eyebrow, unable to help the parallel. He laughed, understanding my concern immediately. I know how it sounds, but it's different. She has her own collection, children's illustrated first editions. Nothing valuable in monetary terms, just books that mattered to her growing up. When I mentioned our library, she asked about my favorite childhood reading memories, not the collection's insurance value. The distinction was telling. She sounds lovely. Will you bring her to dinner? Soon, he promised. But I wanted to talk to you about something else first. He reached into his messenger bag and withdrew a folder. I've been researching legal structures for family collections. There's a particular type of private library trust that might be perfect for us. It would ensure the collection stays intact and in the family while allowing controlled scholarly access. As he explained the details, his face animated with excitement. I saw Richard in him. The same intellectual enthusiasm, the same commitment to preservation and sharing. But I also saw something uniquely Nathan, a hard-won wisdom about balancing protection with generosity, privacy with purpose. The next morning, I called Maxwell Goldman and asked him to draft new documents, not the contingency plans we had discussed during the Amelia situation, but something more meaningful. 2 weeks later, on what would have been Richard's 82nd birthday, I presented Nathan with a slim blue folder after our traditional Wednesday dinner. "What's this?" he asked, opening it curiously. "The deed to the library," I said simply, "and the trust documents establishing the Lancaster family collection. You're named as primary trustee, effective immediately." His eyes widened. "Grandma, no. This is your life's work. I can't. It's our family's legacy," I corrected gently. "And legacies are meant to be passed on while they can still be shared and understood. I'm not going anywhere yet, but I want us to steward this collection together while I can still tell you the stories behind each acquisition, still help you understand what these books meant to your grandfather and me." Nathan stared at the document, then at me, his eyes brimming. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told him, thinking of Amelia's casual dismissal of my essence. "Just promise me one thing, that you'll always remember what truly matters isn't what things are worth, but what made them worth collecting in the first place." He nodded, understanding completely. The stories, the connections, the love. "Exactly," I said, smiling. "And Nathan? I've always rather liked smelling like old books. It means I've lived a life surrounded by things worth keeping." He laughed through his tears and embraced me. "Me too, Grandma. Me too." Standing there in the library that Richard and I had built together, surrounded by the physical manifestation of our shared passions, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The collection would continue, not as a commodity to be acquired or a prize to be won, but as a living legacy, tended by hands that understood its true value. And somewhere, in whatever afterlife might exist for bibliophiles, I knew Richard was smiling. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.